it's EA for Yarn, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make a cell phone sleeve with your Addi knitting machine. This is the Addi Professional, and I'm using worsted weight yarn. I'm in circular knitting mode, and I'm going to cast on all the stitches all the way around. And I'm going to set my row counter to 0. And I like to turn it sideways so I can crank faster. And I'm going to knit about 60 rows, between 58 and 60 rows, for a phone that measures approximately a little over 5 inches from top to bottom. If you have a larger phone, then you would need to make it longer. So there's my 60 rows, and if you're making this for a different sized phone, then what you would do is you would take your tube and stretch it lengthwise, and then you would take your phone and lay it down so that the cast on edge is just past the bottom, and then you would count how many rows it takes to equal the length of the phone, plus a couple more, and then you want that number double because this is going to be, it's going to have a lining in it. So if I've got my length correct, which I have checked it already, then I'm going to make sure that last white needle drops, and I'm going to cut my yarn, leave about a yard tail, and then I'm going to get a piece of waste yarn to bind off with. So I like to take my tail that's from the knitting yarn and just drop it down inside the hole so it stays out of the way. And then I'm going to go around with my waste yarn and pick up every stitch. Okay. So I have my waste yarn threaded through. I'm going to pull out my working yarn, and I'm going to take my tube here, give it a little stretch, and then I'm going to take one end and shove it down inside the tube so that it comes out the other end. And I want the place where my cast on tail is coming out to line up with where my waste yarn is. That's the beginning and end of every round. I don't want it to be twisted. So I'm going to take my working yarn and a crochet hook. I'm going to pick up that last stitch that was knitted, and then I'm going to pick up, see what a lot of people, I don't think they realize that your bind off, your cast on is the same basically as your bind off, in the sense that you have a piece of yarn running through a whole slew of live stitches. So all of these stitches are still live. So I'm going to pick up the live stitch that was the last stitch knitted on the outside, and pick up the live stitch that is the last one threaded through the cast on tail. Then I'm going to pick up the stitch to the left of it on the inside, and I'm also going to pick up the stitch that was the first stitch knitted of the outside round. And I'm actually going to make my tail stick out so I can get to it. And then I'm going to just slip stitch through all of those loops. I like to turn mine upside down, pick up the next stitch to the left of the top layer, the next stitch to the left in the second layer, next stitch to the left in the third layer, if I can get it here, there we go, and the next stitch to the left in the fourth layer, which is on the outside. So I basically have the inside tube flattened and sandwiched between the outside. And I'm going to slip stitch through all of those loops again. And I'm going to keep doing this all the way across. Pick up the next stitch to the left in the first layer. Then we pick up the next stitch to the left on the second layer. Next stitch to the left in the third layer. And the next stitch to the left on the fourth layer. And slip stitch through all thicknesses. And this is what's going to basically sew shut the bottom of your phone sleeve. Alright, so I've slip stitched all the way across through all the thicknesses, and now what I'm going to do is remove the yarn that was holding those live stitches. So I'm going to take my waste yarn, one end of it, and pull on it till it comes all the way out. And then I can't really pull on the other end of this yarn because the other end is worked into the knitting. There's no end of it. This is the other end of it. So what I'm going to do is I can pull it out from over here where it was stretched out, and I can even pull it out from right here, because that's the last place that it was pulled out of the way. And I'm going to tie off my slip stitch yarn here, turn this inside out, and you will be able to see where that the yarn that was holding those live stitches is weaving in and out of the stitches, because the one that had the cast on was on the inside. So now that I've pulled that out, I'm going to take my yarn needle, pick up a couple strands of yarn, and I'm going to make a little knot here to secure that tail, because it was not secured in the knitting. And I'm going to slip it in between the layers of the sleeve, because this is double thick. It can be slid in between the layers and it won't wiggle its way out. Now I'm going to turn it right side out again, and I'm going to weave in my tail here the same way. I'm going to slip it in between the layers of knitting. Alright, and as you can see, this is the perfect size for the phone that I intended it to fit. And if you have a longer phone, then you would need to make your case longer, but this is a regular sized phone. So now what we're going to do is put a button on and a button loop to keep it closed. Alright, so I have my button here, and this is an almost red button. It's a little bit of a lighter red, but I think it matches this pretty closely with the red that's in the yarn. And I'm going to position it right about there. I want it about a 1/2 inch down from the folded edge, and I'm actually going to sew it to the case with yarn. And I like to use a metal tapestry needle because the eye is narrower and has an easier time fitting through the holes in the button. So I'm going to position my button where I want it, centered preferably, and I'm going to come up through one of the holes and I'm going to leave about a 3-inch tail on the back of that. And when I'm using yarn to stitch the button down, I like to take about 3 to 4 stitches. And it's pretty secure because the yarn is thick. You want to keep making sure that that tail doesn't get caught in your stitching. That feels pretty secure to me, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take those two tails and clip them and tie them together in a double knot. And then I'm just going to slip those tails in between the layers of knitting. Okay, now we need a button loop. So this piece of yarn is plenty long enough. I'm going to take my crochet hook and I'm going to attach it on the back side of the sleeve, making sure that it's lined up with the button so that the button is not in the wrong spot for the loop. And I like to pick up about 3 to 4 strands of yarn in the back. Leave a little tail, and I'm going to chain about 10 to start with. And I'm going to bring it down around the button to make sure that it's long enough. And this could actually lose one of those chains. So for this button and for where it's placed, I needed 9 chains. So I'm going to go right back to where I started and slip stitch in the same place. And then I'm going to tie off, tie those tails together in a double knot, and again I'm going to slip them in between the layers. Okay, now this would be fine as is. It holds the phone very nicely, even with a protective case on it. And you can take the little button loop, slide it right over the button, and it'll keep your phone in there. And it's got plenty of stretch in it, so it's got room for even a wider phone. Not much wider, but a little bit wider. This one is about a little over 2.5 inches wide. But some people like to have a wrist strap on their phone sleeve. So I'm going to make a little wrist strap. So to do this, I'm going to get my worsted weight yarn, and I'm going to join, since the edge is a little bit, it's not stretched out per se, but it's a little bit wider than the rest of it, just a tiny bit. And I'm going to take, I'm going to go through the fold to get my attaching spot for the wrist strap. So I'm going to go through about 3 strands of yarn over here, and then 3 more strands of yarn directly opposite, so that I have 2 of the double layers on my hook. And I'm going to pull up a loop of yarn there and chain however long I want my wrist strap to be. That's about 35, and I think that looks about right. And I'm going to go ahead and slip stitch again right where I joined the first part. And I actually recommend, for sturdiness here, to go back across your chain. I'm going to slip stitch in every chain around the loop, because I don't want this to have a lot of stretch. I want it to be pretty strong, because this is going to hold up the weight of the phone. So I'm slip stitching in each chain of the wrist strap all the way around. Alright, so I've gone all the way around, and I'm going to slip stitch again through all the layers of the sleeve, and I'm going to tie off. And then I'm going to again tie the tails together in a double knot. Maybe even a triple knot. and then I'm going to slip the tails in between the layers again. Alright, so there you go. Now you have a little wrist strap on your sleeve to carry it. And this will stretch a little bit if you're carrying it around all the time by the wrist strap. I recommend carrying it in your hand as well, but the wrist strap keeps you from dropping it anyway. Because this will eventually, it doesn't stretch as much lengthwise, but it will make like a stretched spot longer if you're carrying it around in there all the time. So there you have a little sleeve for your cell phone with the button loop and a wrist strap, so you can carry it wherever you want. I hope you try this out, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Bye!